Welcome to Identity Image Solutions training video on wrapping a shroud. This video is designed to take you through the steps on how to wrap a shroud correctly.
These are the materials that you'll be using for the Bondo phase. The shroud. Towel, 36 grit sandpaper, 80 grit sandpaper, Bondo applicator and mixer, mixing tray for your Bondo, alcohol, Bondo, cream hardener. The first step would be sanding down the letters for the Bondo application. Grab your 80 grit sandpaper and begin to sand down the pre-core letters. When sanding, you may use cross marks. This is a very important process in sanding due to the fact that the letters must not pop through the Bondo. Once this process is done, wipe off the letters with alcohol. Spray alcohol on your surface and wipe with a towel. The next step is to mix your Bondo. Place it on your tray and mix with a small amount of hardening cream. Be sure to mix this quickly due to the fact that the Bondo will dry quickly and harden. Now we are going to apply the Bondo to our surface. Apply several layers of Bondo over the pre-core letters until you have a clean coated surface. The next step would be sanding down the Bondo. Take your 36 grit sandpaper and smooth out the rough areas. The next step is to refine the Bondo with the 80 grit sandpaper. The next step is to clean the surface with our towel and alcohol. Wipe down the area that we've been working on with alcohol. A self-lighting torch, clamps or masking tape, 3M primer and a sponge, colored pencil, X-Acto knife and extra blades, squeegee. Our next step is to flip over the shroud and clean our edges and our corners with our towel and our alcohol. Using your alcohol, clean the ribs and the ridges on the back side of the shroud, making sure that all corners and edges are properly cleaned. Our next step is to clean the tops and the bottoms of our shrouds. Use your alcohol to clean the top and the bottom edges. Next, we will repeat this process for our second shroud. Flip the second shroud over and begin cleaning the ribs, edges, and corners. Now our next step is to apply our primer with our sponge. Now we will apply our primer to the edges, the ribs, and the top and bottom of our shroud. Repeat the same process on the second shroud. Once you have followed all these steps, assemble the two pieces together, making sure that the center is tightly closed. Taking your two shrouds, connect them down the middle, making sure that the middle is nice and tight. Next, we are going to center our graphic and mark our spot. Now, lay the graphic on the shroud, making sure that it is properly centered, left to right, top to bottom. Be sure to make your mark with a colored pencil. The next step is to secure the edges with our clamps or our tape. After making sure that you have even spacing all around your shroud, take your clamps or your tape and fasten the graphic to the shroud. In this step, we are going to pull the vinyl back from the wax paper. This is a tedious process and cannot be rushed. Now, we will remove the graphic from the wax paper. Pulling it back gently and evenly, this is a tedious job and must be done properly without rushing. Next, you will lift up the corner of the graphic, pulling it slowly back from the wax paper, lifting it and easing it all the way from left to right. Going to the opposite side of the shroud, pull back the corner, easing the graphic from the wax paper, pulling it back evenly in a straight line. Pull the graphic approximately 25% up the shroud. Next, you will pull the graphic a quarter of the way up the shroud, cutting the wax paper making a straight line all the way across. Taking your X-Acto knife, cut the wax paper away from the graphic, making sure that you do not cut the graphic. This will result in damaging the graphic, and the graphic will have to be reprinted. Once the wrap is a quarter way up the shroud, pull on the wrap, making sure that no wrinkles or bubbles are left behind. Next, flip the graphic over, gently tacking it to the shroud. You will go to each corner, gently lifting it and stretching it out, releasing any bubbles or wrinkles that may be left behind. Once the wrap is tacked to the shroud, take your squeegee and squeegee downward to remove all bubbles. Once you are sure that the graphic is properly tacked to the shroud, begin squeegeeing from the corner point downward to the edge of the shroud. Our next step is to pull back the graphic to the midpoint of the shroud. Once you have squeegeed to the quarter point of the shroud, flip the graphic over and take the wax paper off the graphic to halfway point of the shroud. Next, we will pull the graphic back another quarter of the way. Doing this will keep the graphic tight and keeping it from being overexposed and letting it tack to the shroud. Continue working downward to the 3/4 point of the shroud, making sure that you are squeegeeing left to right. Our next step is to pull back the graphic entirely, removing the paper, keeping even tension. Once you reach the 3/4 point of the shroud, you may take the wax paper off the graphic, making sure when pulling the wax paper off the graphic, you are pulling evenly in a straight line, using your squeegee to squeegee out the wrinkles and the bubbles downwardly towards the corners and the ends. Next, you will take your X-Acto blade, placing it in the middle of the shroud, gently cutting it. Take your X-Acto and place it in the center of the shroud, cutting it evenly all the way down, making sure that the blade is securely in the center of the groove. Make sure that the blade does not skew from this groove. Our next step would be doing a double cut on the rib. A double cut is necessary due to the fact that a single cut can cause wrinkles on the sides. Next, you will flip over the shroud and do double cuts between the ribs. Double cuts are necessary between the ribs due to the fact that a single cut will cause wrinkles and bubbles along the edges. Once your double cuts are completed, take the flap, stretch it downward, and gently squeegee it. Once your double cuts are completed, take the flats and gently squeegee them downward with your squeegee. Make sure when squeegeeing that no bubbles or wrinkles are left behind. Now, we are going to cut and remove the excess. Next, go to the top portion of the shroud. Gently ease back the graphic from the shroud. Take your squeegee and gently squeegee the graphic into the ridge of the shroud. Once this process is done, neatly tuck in the corners. Once you have properly squeegeed the graphic into the ridge, take your X-Acto and cut away all the excess vinyl. Once the excess vinyl is removed, gently take the corners and stretch them over the ends of the shroud. Keeping good tension on these corners and flipping them over the corners will prevent any wrinkles or bubbles. We will take our self-lighting torch, heating the entire shroud, exposing any wrinkles or bubbles. If there are any wrinkles or bubbles exposed, you will take your bubble popper and pop each bubble and smooth out each wrinkle that is necessary. Flip over your shrouds and take your self-light torch to heat seam the edges and the corners and the ribs. Heat seaming with the torch will secure the graphic to the shroud, making sure that it does not lift. The heat activates the glue in the primer and also in the graphic, making it extra aggressive. Heat seaming the edges, corners, and ribs will prevent any lifting and will activate the primer and the graphic glue to become very aggressive. If bubbles are exposed, take your bubble puncher and gently puncture the bubble and ease it out with your squeegee. Now that the shroud is complete, look over the shroud top to bottom, left to right, and check all corners and edges to be sure everything is sealed properly. Take your X-Acto knife and cut out the pre-drilled holes. Ease the X-Acto knife into the pre-drilled hole, pressing it up against the edge of the hole. Gently do a circular motion around the self-drilled hole until the cut is complete. Looking over the entire shroud, check for any bubbles, wrinkles, or excess vinyl that may be exposed. If any excess vinyl is exposed, take your X-Acto and gently cut it, making sure that the graphic is not damaged in these cuts. Congratulations, you have now successfully wrapped the shroud.